In the last episode, we saw how Paul, after his conversion, went to Mount Sinai in Arabia, then to Jerusalem, and then home to Tarsus to think about what it meant to be called an apostle to the Gentiles. That question rapidly came to the fore in the church's first decade. Who could be part of the body of Christ? Because here's the deal. Jesus was a Jew. The disciples were Jews. Paul was a Jew. The earliest church was Jewish. The first tension bubbling behind the question of who could be a Jesus follower was between Hellenist Jews, the Jews outside of Israel, and Hebrew Jews, the Jews inside the Promised Land. And as tricky as that tension was, the early church managed the relationship between the Hellenists and the Hebrews within the family of faith. However, the second tension was much more complex. Jews versus Gentiles. You see, as much as there was tension between the Hellenists and Hebrew Christians, both were ethnically Jewish. But Gentiles, people who were not ethnically Jewish, were becoming interested in the gospel message. Paul, as we know, was called by Jesus to be an apostle to the Gentiles. But Paul was not the only person thinking about the Gentile believer question. The church in Jerusalem was facing the situation as well. To understand how that was unfolding, we have to get some background on the leader of that church, the Apostle Peter. Like all the early followers of Jesus, Peter was from Galilee, the north end of Israel. His hometown was Bethsaida, a village on the north end of the Sea of Galilee. Galilee had a fishing economy, and before meeting Jesus, Peter and his brother Andrew were partners in a small fishing business with their father, whose business partner was a man named Zebedee and his two sons, James and John. Yes, the apostles James and John. In a coming video, we'll talk more about James and John. But it was the two patriarchs and each of their two sons, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Those two sets of brothers, the fishing partners, were the first four disciples Jesus called. As an aside, Andrew and John might have known Jesus first, as they were disciples of John the Baptist, and they would have had met Jesus through his baptism by John in the Jordan River. So, the first four disciples, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, were fishermen and business partners on the Sea of Galilee. Besides those four, Philip was also from Bethsaida, and post-resurrection, Nathanael and Thomas were part of a fishing venture with Peter. So potentially, 7 of the 12 disciples were fishermen on the Sea of Galilee. Here's a fishing boat archaeologists discovered on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee in 1986. It is from the 1st century AD, the exact time frame of the New Testament. So while we could never conclusively connect this boat to Jesus or the disciples, it is the style boat they would have used to fish and transport themselves around the lake, as we read over and over in the gospel narrative. And who knows, maybe it was once used by Jesus and the disciples or one of their friends or relatives. Want to hear something else wild that archaeologists have discovered? Peter's home. Except it's not in Bethsaida. You see, Jesus established Capernaum, a fishing town just 6 miles down the coast from Bethsaida, as the home base for his Galilean ministry, the very start of Jesus' ministry after his baptism. Before meeting Jesus, Peter's family had moved from Bethsaida to Capernaum. The Peter, Andrew, James, and John fishing business was based out of Capernaum, and the building was the home of Peter and Andrew. Potentially, James and John's family lived next door. Jesus did not own a home during his ministry, so he lived with Peter and Andrew in that house. But we've gotten ahead of ourselves. You might have thought before about Peter's names. The New Testament references him in several different ways. Here's why. Peter was not his given name. Jesus gave him that name. His given Hebrew name was Simon. Technically, Jesus gave him the name Cephas or Kephas, which means rock or stone in Aramaic. And Petros is the masculine equivalent of rock in Greek, the New Testament's language. Petros is where the English Peter comes from. It's like a nickname, Rocky or Simon the Rock. So Simon, Cephas, Peter, Simon Peter, all the same guy, the Apostle Peter. If you count all the variations of Peter's name, the New Testament names Peter 181 times, more than anyone else in the New Testament whose name is not Jesus. Even more than the Apostle Paul, who comes in second at 177 mentions. So Peter was one of the 12 disciples, Jesus' hand-picked group of students who always traveled with him. Of the 12, there were 3 that Jesus singled out as the core leaders, Peter, James, and John. Those 3 were the only disciples present at certain critical events in Jesus' life, such as the Transfiguration and Jesus' night of agony in the Garden of Gethsemane before his arrest. Interestingly, Andrew was not part of the inner group, but the Bible doesn't explain why that is the case. Peter was not only part of the inner 3, but also the leader and spokesman of the 12 disciples. It's easy to see this in the text when you look for it. For example, Peter's name is listed first when the New Testament lists the disciples. Peter typically acts first or speaks for the group, like when he tries to walk on water to meet Jesus. One event is of particular significance, so let's take a closer look. Halfway through his ministry, right before the Transfiguration, Jesus asks the disciples the critical question, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answers, "You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus responds to Peter saying, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I will tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Wow. Vast volumes have been written on those few sentences from Jesus. But just a few notes of clarification. First, while Peter doesn't understand the meaning of calling Jesus the Messiah at this point, it is still the turning point of the gospel narrative. Here, the disciples understand that Jesus is the Messiah, confirmed in the next scene at Jesus' Transfiguration. Then we're on to part 2 of Jesus' ministry, heading towards Jerusalem and the cross. What about the next part, where Jesus says, "On this rock I will build my church," and the stuff about binding, loosing, and the keys to the kingdom? What is the rock that Jesus is referring to? Is Peter, whose name means rock, the rock? Or is Peter's confession that Jesus is the Messiah the rock? In a straightforward reading, the text equates Peter with the rock on which the church will be built. Undoubtedly, Peter was one of the foundational leaders of the early church, so he is a rock in this sense. However, Roman Catholics will argue further than this that Jesus establishing Peter as the first pope. There is much more to that theological discussion, and I'll have to leave it there for now. What about the binding and loosing language? It is rabbinic terminology. It refers to actions that were prohibited or bound and permitted or loosed. Jesus is giving Peter the authority to prohibit and permit specific actions in the early church, authority that the keys symbolize. In the following video, we will see Peter wielding the keys in the early church when he answers the question of Gentile converts to the faith.